The Green New Deal not only turns the tide on climate change, it revives the economy, as the New Deal did during the 1930s, and importantly, it makes the friggin' wars for oil obsolete. And as others were saying before, that is how we managed to pay for this thing. Two ways. One is that because you don't need these wars for oil, we can cut that dangerous, bloated military budget. Because that budget is not making us safer, it is making us more endangered. What has it done? Since 2001, we have spent $6 trillion, according to a Harvard study, and sometimes they get it right. $6 trillion, that is $75,000 for every person in this room. By the time we are done paying for the health care of the wounded soldiers, we will have paid $75,000 per household for these wars for oil since 2001. We will have killed 1 million people in Iraq alone, which is not winning us the hearts and minds of the Middle East, you can be sure. And we will have killed and maimed tens of thousands of US soldiers. And what do we have to show for it is the other thing. Exactly what we have to show is failed states, every one of them, mass refugee migrations, which are tearing apart the Middle East and which are tearing apart Europe, and worse, terrorist threats. And I want to underscore that because all we hear 10 times a day in the media is how we have to drop more bombs and shoot them up, and that's the solution to ISIS. Well, actually, who created ISIS? We created ISIS. And it wasn't just George Bush. I want to be clear, because Barack Obama fought tooth and nail to keep the troops in Iraq as long as he possibly could. It was George Bush who established a deadline by which withdrawal had to happen because we lost the immunity for US soldiers. So this is a bipartisan disaster. I want to be clear. But it goes far back beyond ISIS. You may know, where did the whole jihad terrorist thing start? It started in Afghanistan as a scheme devised by the CIA and by Saudi Arabia in order to thwart the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. So we created this jihadi terror movement. It went on from the Mujahideen to the Taliban to Al-Qaeda and then to ISIS. With each turn of the wheel, the cycle of violence becomes more terrible, more unmanageable, more of a disaster. More of the same is not the solution. It's time to stop a foreign policy which is essentially a marketing strategy for the weapons industry. And we need to be able to talk about this. This is why the political predator parties, the Democrats and Republicans, work so hard to silence us, because they cannot hold a candle to the facts, to the truth, and to the basic American values, which are values of peace and community and justice and human rights. This is what our foreign policy needs to be based on. So we call for, by the way, we call for a peace offensive. That's what we need in the Middle East. We need to put a weapons embargo on the Middle East. We are arming all sides of the conflict and benefiting from it. $100 billion in weapons to the Saudis alone in the last 10 years. So we are applying a flamethrower to the Middle East. We need a weapons embargo, which we can initiate. We need a freeze on the funding of our allies who are funding the training and the arming of so-called terrorist groups. With one hand, we are fighting terror. With the other hand, we and our allies are funding and arming and training terrorist groups. We started it, we can stop it, and we can do this now in our time.